Access live on Comcast Channel 26, also streamed on our Facebook page. I'm your host, Nunez, along with producer Jason Cole today. Our very special guest, Las Vegas Robertson head coach Adam Bustos. A couple weeks ago, his Cardinals beat St. Mike's 58-46 for the state championship at the Pit. Coach, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
You know, Coach, you took over I think it was January 24th from Coach James Branch. And, you got some great talent. We'll get to that in a little bit. And you and I talked a little bit yesterday. It's in the middle of the season, and, Coach Branch has been around the north in Cuesta, Taos. He's been to a lot of Española. He's been to a lot of places. And, sometimes when a coach takes over in mid-season, you mentioned to me, we'll get this in a minute. You play for West Las Vegas. You come from a coaching tree, man. David Bustos, your cousin, Darren Bustos. We'll get to that in a minute. But talk a little bit about the adjustments and changes. Again, if you're handing it off from one coach, and your style might probably be different than James Branch, who's, like I said, a hard driver. Talk a little bit about that because, it culminated in a state championship, man. It did. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Again, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's a kind of good to talk basketball and, get off the work day a little bit and, talk about basketball. But yeah, it was it was interesting because, obviously, things happen fast and, we had to kind of make our adjustments. I think, if I'm talking about, kind of the progression of it, I think, we took over and I think we played West Las Vegas that day. And you maintain, you keep what you're doing, you go through it and, we got some wins, we strung together some wins. But, where I think it really hit us is we had St. Mike's and we had Santa Fe Indian. And those were our two losses that we had, right after I took over. And, the good programs and all season, I talked about, how we had to be prepared, we had to be ready, we had to be crisp. We couldn't have weaknesses in what we do. By the time you get to state, obviously we've been there. This was our fourth year, and you learn what you're good at, what you need improving, and that kind of had that in mind. Now for Santa Fe Indian, St. Mike's, that I think that was a real wake up call for all of us. I think I've been around these boys a long time, coached them since they were younger. I've been with the program I 7 or 8 years now. But I remember being in the Santa Fe Indian locker room after the loss, and it was hard. It was an adjustment. Looking at them, not quite seeing any trust in their eyes, trying to trust myself, figure out what I wanted to do, how we wanted to steer this program and keep rolling, and that was a point where we said, okay, we need to really, be on the same page. And again, credit to the athletes, Jesse James, the next day he brought him into the locker room. He talked to the boys. He said, this is where we're at. This is what we're doing. And, we all got to kind of get through it together. And I think from there, we started to develop a trust for each other. And I think that was the big thing is, yes, we've been together. I've been around the program. I had a pretty long leash as far as, game plan and strategy, and that was nice. But as far as being the head coach, there had to be trust there. And I think, fortunately, we were able to develop it pretty quickly. My trust for what the guys can do, and then the trust from the guys to be able to trust that I can, kind of run the program. And so, that week we lost to Santa Fe Indian and St. Mike's was, kind of a wake-up call and kind of the point where, we could either sunk or swam. So,
that's a big thing, and I think leadership and trust inside the huddle. I got to say this: being around the state tournament, I told you I've been around the game over 50 years. So, I'm up on the concourse, and I hear conversations about coaches. It doesn't matter what class, and I'm kind of bending my ear a little bit about we got out coached. This happened, that happened, not in your game, but all games. I just bend my ear a little, and it's easy. And same thing with officiating. I officiated 22 years. And, before I was an official, I was one of the worst there was on officials. I was until I put the whistle on and you're not a coach or player anymore. You have to think as an official. Same thing with refs. So you hear all these things. So inside the huddle, it's a different thing, man. It is. So, we work with Coach Segura, Damian Segura, who I have the utmost respect for. as he's our color commentator, my son called your championship game. So
Okay.
my son working with Damian, we always go to him, coach, inside the huddle, what do you got? What do you got? Because he knows inside the huddle under two, right? What do you got? So when you're in that huddle, you talked about trust, and you talked about a kid like Jesse James Gonzalez. Oh my goodness, right? Leader. So he brings everybody together. You got a fantastic freshman in George Smith. Fantastic. This kid is so athletic. You see him play, you're like, man, how are you going to stop that? I don't care what you play on this
Right.
kid. He's got athletic skills that a lot of people don't. But I think that trust, and and I could just see that in the locker room. Hey guys, from a senior who averages 16.3 points per game and is a leader, makes those plays, tells everybody to come together. We're going to be okay, because those losses to St. Mike 69-46, and then to Santa Fe Indians 68-54. Certainly afterward, there's looking like, what the heck, right? People are looking like, what's up, man? What's up? Can you do this? And so after that, you reel off, I think, 10, 12 wins in a row, and then you win a championship. So leadership, especially from key players, man, that means a lot. I could just see that. So that leadership there, and everybody bought in. You got to have the buy-in, right? Doesn't matter if they're good players. You had them, but they had to buy in.
Yeah, no, and that kind of leads to, kind of what I've been talking with these guys about, is sacrifice. Jesse James, the game we lost to St. Mike's, he sprained his ankle pretty hard in the first quarter. So did George. George wasn't as bad. He kind of tweaked it. Jesse hurt it, and then so he didn't really. I think he had 5 points that game, but he was hobbling around against Santa Fe Indian. We had to make the decision. Hey, Jesse, are you going to play, or should we sit you? What's our ultimate goal? Are we looking for state championship, or are we looking to skate through district? And so we sat him. We sat him that game. We sat him the Santa Fe Prep game, and he played. He got into it for the next West game, and going back, he probably sacrificed a district player of the year, his scoring averages, to be able to be healthy and rest and be ready for the state playoffs. So, that was a sacrifice in itself. And that's, I think, part of going back to us trusting each other and saying, hey, you know what, we're looking long-term, and we're looking towards the state championship and not necessarily district. So, there's a lot in play there.
That's huge, because, a lot of players, I want to play. But here's what I always ask players. Are you hurt, or are you injured? You're injured, sit down. You're hurt, let's go. And I played injured, and I was dumb. I played with torn ligaments one time, and I was dumb. I thought I could get out there, and I did, but I was dumb. So I think that you mentioned that's a huge sacrifice. That kid, but he's a leader anyway. He's been a leader doesn't he play football too?
Yeah, starting quarterback. Oh. Yeah.
So you got that guy who's inside his own huddle in football. The quarterback's the only one that talks, the only one that says what's the play, and everybody else be quiet. So that's a leader. Boy, you're lucky to have him. They're lucky to have you too. I gotta say that. Let's go a little bit over your own background. You mentioned you played at West Las Vegas. Hey, I'll tell you this, man. You're a true norteño, right? True norteño, man. I always say that.
Yes,
I tell Richard Tripp he's the king of the North, but there's a lot of kings over there, man. I don't want to leave anybody out. But talk a little bit about, you mentioned I think it was your dad that played for championships there. Was a coach at West?
Yeah, my dad. So my dad's Art Bustos. He played 69 through 71, I believe. I think he played in one state championship for football, and 2 or 3 for basketball. So there's a lot of history there. Again, went to West Las Vegas, played with some great players. Played under David Bustos was our head coach. I grew up under I don't know if you know Gene Mathis.
Heard the name?
He was 21, 22-point scorer for West Las Vegas, played a year at Stanford, I believe. Wow. He was my coach since I grew up, since I could, put on a diaper, I was in the gym. His son and me, his son passed in the last year and a half or 2 years. We grew up playing basketball together. But, I played at West Las Vegas. I was always, I think coaching probably suits me a little better. I was always kind of a basketball nerd. I couldn't, jump the highest or run the fastest. But I was proud of, I used to count my double doubles for assists. I just liked getting the team involved, like to make sure that everybody was engaged. And, I think that transferred well to coaching. But I know I joked because you asked me, can you give me some of your, resume and stuff? And, I don't have one. I've been an assistant coach. I just love doing it. I love being around the program. I love strategy. I love, talking basketball. And I think, that's what it is. I'm not in education. I'm a federal worker. I moved back home when my dad got sick 6 or 7 years ago. My nephews were playing basketball at that point. I said, I want to coach. And that's kind of, where I come from. And, just to kind of expand on it a little bit more, Davey Bustos was my coach. Learned so much from him. Darren Bustos was a coach for a year, and then he moved over to Arizona. But, he was in my ear. We text back and forth, about games and about, strategy and different things. And so that was a help. Growing up, I played in summer tournaments with Terry Darnell and Benny Ortiz. And
I heard of them.
Gabe Maldonado. I mean, just some of these really good players that are just, prominent here in northern New Mexico and central New Mexico. And I'd like to kind of acknowledge and say, like, I learned a lot from them. I've been around the game. I've not always been the best. I think I led the state in assists my junior and senior years, and I was proud of that, but it was because I played with so many good players. And I think that continued on. And I think it benefited me just knowing all these, good basketball players that are so prominent, that really did help.
Benny Ortiz, the referee, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I know who Benny is. Okay. So I got to tell you a funny story about Coach Darnell, who I've known for years. I repped a lot of his games, but I used to tease him. I'd say, he was a very good player, even up to 3-4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I used to say, Terry, man, stop practicing with your kids. Stop playing with them. Because then the kids go home and the parents are like, well, who's the best player? Coach Darnell. So stop playing with them. The guy was amazing. He hit 35-foot shots, man. The guy was quite an athlete and quite a coach. So you mentioned growing up around him, Terry Darnell. Man, that guy got after it. I tell you, as a referee, I know more than once. We're friends. Before the game was funny. Hey, what's up? The big hug. As soon as the game started, holy cow. He's going to work you, man. And we're still friends today. I have all the athletic director at Sandia Prep. He's come full circle, man. Full circle. For sure. He really has. So you had some good mentors. There's no doubt about it. And the strategy part, you mentioned Darren Bustos and Davey, man. Davey, heck of a coach there at West Las Vegas. Davey got after you, man. Whew, Davey got after you. I still remember him working in the sidelines. And then, his late wife, was an outstanding coach as well. Somebody said she knew X's and O's as well as anybody did. So, you had some great background in there. And then the strategy you mentioned, you text back and forth with Darren. I'm sure you still stay in touch. Davey's got Davey's Diner up there in Las Vegas. Now he's out of coaching. I'm sure that's going well. I talk to him once in a while. But you had some good people helping you out on the way to where you got, man.
Definitely. And just to kind of expand on that, because, I do think that there's, credit should be given where it's due. And, Coach Manny Romero, I coached under him for 2 years. And man, just, talk about somebody that's disciplined and that understands the game. And the sets that we're still running now are stuff that he brought in, learn some of his offenses, his defenses, kind of how he thought the game. And so, every coach I've had along the way, I've worked under, I've, made it a point to learn from them and then, bring in some of my own stuff. And I think it meshed real nicely with, what I wanted to do. And, it worked out for this group of kids that we have, which again, they're just good group of kids. At the beginning of the year, I played with these guys, for the last 7 years, I scrimmage with them. I go up and down, I try to play. And, I told the assistant coaches at the end of the year, I said, I can't play with these guys anymore. I said, I used to be able to hold my own and do what I wanted to do. And at the end of the year, I said, these guys are good. And I said, they're special and they're good group of kids. And, I used to be able to go in there and do what I wanted. And towards the end of the year, I couldn't, I'd kind of sit back and,
That's how good they were. Coach,
we're going to
take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk more about this year's version of the championship with Robertson Cardinals after these messages on the Sports Desk.
Sounds good.
Well, I'm going to the frontier, walking to the cashier, order up a root beer and a number one. Cover it with green stuff, one scoop is not enough. Find a booth is real tough, back by the Duke. Meet my family, meet my friends in the quirkiest restaurant I have ever been. All of Albuquerque's favorite spot. It's the Frontier Restaurant.
The Frontier Restaurant is a proud supporter of ProView Networks.
I'm David C. Chavez, personal injury attorney. Our law firm was founded by my father, Thibaut J. Chavez, with one goal: to get New Mexicans the help they need. That's why we built a different kind of law firm. We focus on family values, dedicated service, and we make a real contribution by giving back to our communities. We can't change what happened to you or your loved ones, but we can help you get back on the road to recovery. We're by your side, and we're still as local as red and green.
You followed him from the first day he signed with the team. You remember the day he poured in 63 points? The night he played a sold-out concert to 30,000 people. The day he gave his infamous speech. That's why you believe in heroes. That's why you remember and collect their memorabilia. All in Autographs, where you can meet some of the greats, collect some of the greats, and share your own legacy. Visit All In Autographs, where you can celebrate the great and have your own piece of history.
Don't sacrifice quality and flavor when you're in a hurry. Golden Pride offers ribs, fried chicken, red and green chili breakfast burritos, and Frontier sweet rolls. 4 great locations, or visit us online at goldenprideabq.com. Golden Pride Barbecue Chicken and Ribs are proud supporters of ProView Sports.
We've been trained, conditioned, and rewarded for doing more. But people weren't designed for all that doing. Our bodies need to settle into nothing from time to time. Into nothing at all. In a world obsessed with doing more, we invite you to undo.
Back to the Sports Desk live on Comcast Channel 26, also streamed on our Facebook page. I'm your host, Ed Nunez. A very special guest today, Las Vegas Robertson head coach Adam Bustos. Little slip there, man, when you talk West and Robertson, man. Sometimes you get them mixed up, and I don't even live out there, man, so my apologies to all the Northanians that might get upset, man. Robertson head coach Adam Bustos, his Cardinals defeating St. Mike's for the state championship just about a couple weeks ago here. So 58-46, and what a game it was. You mentioned, in the first half about your background. I got to go over some of the final games that you played, and my son, ProView commentator, you wouldn't believe, man, how many pages of notes he had on you. You got this kid here. He's crazy, man. He researches like nobody I've ever seen, and he's my son.
I'm a stats guy too, so that's cool.
Oh man, you guys get along famously. We beat Theroux in the opening round. 3 guys in double figures: Jesse James Gonzalez with 19, George Smith with 14, Nathaniel Gonzalez with 13. So that was a good win for you there. And you'd been in the state finals the last 3 seasons. Any pressure there at all when you got to the final? Strong start to the season, started 17-2. You dropped 2 district games. We mentioned that. You righted the ship with 2 wins over St. Mike's. And St. Mike's, man, jeez, I saw them. That one, God, they're a really good team and well coached. Yes. George Smith averaged 16 points a game for you. Jesse James Gonzalez, 15.8. Nathaniel Gonzalez at 12.8. Their depth, several guys can get double figures. Again, all the pieces were there. But talk a little bit about your game against West. That was one of your playoff games. It's always a big game. You beat them earlier. That's always a huge rivalry. In fact, I asked somebody, I didn't know that the 2 schools are within walking distance. It's like, very close. I didn't know that. So talk a little bit about your game against West, because when you play West, and the Cardinals and the Dons get together, it's
so with West, you always say 2 things. Records go out the window when you play a crosstown rival, and playing West is interesting. So Ryan Aragon, he's actually one of my best friends. We worked together at Highlands. We used to, when I was an assistant coach, he was an assistant coach. We, go into each other's office and, just chat and, talk about the games and stuff. And so, have a lot of respect for him, a lot of respect for that program, a lot of respect for those kids over there. But going in and playing West, man, I was just like, well, here we are in the quarterfinals against West again. We've seen each other quite a few times over the last 5 or 6 years. And one of the things, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I don't forget things very, very easily. And we lost to them about, I would say about 6 years ago in the quarterfinals. We were up most of the game. They came back. Davey obviously has his run and jump press that the South schools run a lot. They came in and they beat us, and from there I said, it doesn't matter our records, doesn't matter what we do. When we come, we got to play them. And last year they gave us a good game. I think we ended up winning by 8. They stuck around the entire game. So this year, I think going into that game, we the goal is to put together 4 good quarters. And I think that was our goal throughout the tournament. We've always been a solid team, but, when you look back at the state championship against St. Mike's, against Navajo Prep, there's a point where we just had some bad quarters. And, I just wanted, the boys to really understand that, hey, when we get to this point, every possession matters, every minute matters, every quarter matters. And I think they really understood that. And our game plan going into it, we just felt like, what we had done in previous matchups with them is something that we can still do for the quarterfinals. And we were able to stick with it. It was funny because, when you're not pressing and running and breaking and doing stuff, the game's not as, it slows down a little bit. And we were laughing because the crowd got kind of quiet. By the end of the game, it was, it wasn't this barn burner. It wasn't, back and forth, but it was just a solid victory for us. The guys did what they needed to do. They, played defense, they executed on offense, and, it came out with the win. And, again, anytime you play West, you take it. So I'm really proud of the guys.
The crowd was quiet when you beat West. That's remarkable, because normally everything's at, a fever pitched, man. So that kind of tells you how dominant you were. Then you beat in the semis Santa Fe Indian, and quite convincingly, 64-35. And they beat you earlier. You mentioned that's one of the 2 losses when you took over. Any kind of revenge there in mind? And
well, Santa Fe, again, another solid program. Coach Abeda, the discipline he has, the offense he runs, the way these kids can shoot at Santa Fe Indian, man, you just, you really just got to, put on your boots and come to work with them. You got to stay, you got to stay in their chest. You got to have a hand up. You got to, not get lazy on screens. And, and I think the boys really understood that. And, it really was an advantage playing them so much that, that we knew that, hey, there's no secrets, there's no gimmicks, there's no trick plays that's going to work against these guys. You guys got to come to work, play them hard and not take possession off. And, they went up, I think they went up 9-2 or 11-2 in that first quarter. And, they did their homework. They knew that we were going to play tight, knew that we were going to play on them, and they beat us backdoor, I think 3 or 4 times right away to start out with. And, luckily we were able to adjust. These guys were able to stay disciplined. And, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a revenge, but I think that game had a lot of pressure on it for the guys, for myself. When you make it to the state championship, you're going 3 years, trying to get there to the 4th year, making it to the state championship game, that's the baseline, and so, I think we felt some pressure in that semifinal game, say, hey, you know what, we need to win this game. We're supposed to win this game, so there was some pressure there, but I think the guys just were really focused for that game, and rightfully so, because again, they're just a good team that's just, you can't slack off against, you can't get lazy against. There's no shortcuts around it for playing Santa Fe Indian, and these guys just really answered the call, and again, it's kind of just a credit to them.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You mentioned the discipline you had to have against them, and then in the state championship, St. Mike's team, who you'd beaten twice, and our producer Jason Pohl has some pictures here that you sent, and he'll get them up here in a second. But you talk a little bit about that game, because I was very impressed with St. Mike's. You mentioned defending Santa Fe Indian, and St. Mike's brings their own challenge as far as defending them. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So St. Mike's again, storied program. I used to attend the St. Mike's camps when I was little. It's just St. Mike's is St. Mike's basketball. They amazing talent, deep bench, good size, and they're a good program. And again, they're a tough team to play. They're a very good team to play. Just a quick mention, Nick Miller is an assistant coach over there. He's a JV coach for St. Mike's, and that was actually one of my kind of idols growing up. I seen him play when he was a senior, I think when I was a freshman, and they won state that year. And man, I told him when I first saw him at the first time playing, I said, man, I used to watch you when I was little. You'd get the ball at that free throw line, you turn, go one way and score. And so just a lot of respect for those guys. Israel, another assistant coach I played in tournaments with. We've kind of grown up together. We know each other, and just a lot of basketball talent, a lot of basketball pedigree over at St. Mike's. Again, with St. Mike's, we knew they were going to want to press us. We knew that they were going to use their length and their half-court press. We knew that they were physical. We knew that they had a lot of depth, and we kind of prepared for it that way, just like we did the previous games. I think these guys, my guys, are just ready for the challenge. So on the other side of it, and kind of going back to me telling you how I was, playing with these guys, with my group and trying to scrimmage with them, I also knew that our guys are good. And if we can, it's hard to guard us for 32 minutes. It's hard to open that court up. And I really do think, at St. Mike's, their court feels a little smaller. And, that's a little bit easier to press, a little bit easier to defend over there. I knew that at the pit, we had a little bit more real estate all around the floor. And I really, I know it's kind of a minor detail, but, I really wanted to utilize all that floor, and so press breakers,
no, it is.
Spreading out and, getting to the sidelines and baselines, that's huge, especially on a big court. And, I think that worked to advantage for us. And, again, credit to St. Mike's. They're just a solid team. 2 years ago, they beat us, and, we went up again. We went up 19-10 at the end of the first quarter when they beat us for the state championship. They came back, they pressed us, they used the diamond press, and we didn't really recover. And, and like I said, that stuff stays fresh in my mind. And, I remember that. I remember those kind of things, and I knew, hey, we need to have multiple press breakers. We can't just stick with what we do through the whole year. We have to have multiple things that we utilize. And, I think that helped us. We had worked on a couple of different offensive series to use in the state championship game. And actually, luckily, we didn't quite use them because, what we were able to do was keeping us ahead and keeping us with a little bit of cushion. So, these guys just really, they answered the call. They, they stayed disciplined. They did what they were supposed to do. And then, like I said, being able to be on a little bigger court, I actually think it gave us a little bit of an advantage with just the way we play. So
no doubt about it. We've got to wrap it up, Coach, but I just wanted to mention your fantastic freshman George Smith, 15.7 points per game. Nathaniel Gonzalez at 12.4. So Jesse James you mentioned Jesse James at 16.3, Brian Lucero 6.9 points per game. You hit 49 threes on the you hit 205 threes on the season. So, Coach, Adam Bustos, Robertson Cardinals, 2025 3A champions, beat St. Mike's 58-46. We thank you so much for being our guest today on the Sports Desk.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, giving us this time, and thanks for the coverage all season. Appreciate it.
You bet. For producer Jason Pohl, I'm Ed Nunez. We'll see you next week on the Sports Desk. Great job, Coach. I really appreciate it, man. I wish you all the luck.